Welcome to another episode of Why This Is a Great Spiritual Song. Today we have The Logical Song by Supertramp. Now, The Logical Song was written by Roger Hodgson and released on the album Breakfast in America in 1979. All right, so I recommend listening to the song first, especially if you've never heard it before, so that you have the song fresh in your mind as I go through the song's lyrics. When I was young, it seemed that life was so wonderful, a miracle. Oh, it was beautiful, magical. And all the birds in the trees, well, they'd be singing so happily. Oh, joyfully. Oh, playfully watching me. Now remember your childhood? Didn't it seem magical? Wasn't the world just so wonderful, so alive? Didn't the world seem like a big playground? Didn't it seem like there was no past, no future, just the present moment, just the now? And even if you did grow up in a dysfunctional or abusive home like I did, I still remember many times of being at awe with life. I remember laying on the grass on summer days, just watching the birds flying around, watching the bugs and the bees flying around, and watching the fluffy white clouds passing by in the blue sky. I did find life to be magical. That's the innocence of childhood. And it's a beautiful, wonderful part of our human experience. During our childhood, whether we realized it or not, we were more connected to Source because our egos weren't fully developed yet. We were present with life, and life was a joy. Just watch kids in the playground. They are laughing and playing and joyful. They're not living in the past or future. They're here and now. And they're spontaneous and they are free. They're not completely separated from Source yet. That's why they seem so innocent, so fresh, so alive. Then look at the adults around them. So serious, dead looking, not playful at all, not in awe with life, not present, not free. You don't see adults watching the clouds passing by, or watching the birds, or even hearing the birds singing. As adults, we're trapped in our egos, and our minds become so full of noise, that for many of us, we can't even hear the birds singing in the trees. Case in point, I remember for me, one of the first things I began to notice after my awakening was hearing the birds singing. I remember stopping and listening to the birds and reveling in it. And it almost brought me to tears because I had realized that before my mind was so full of noise, full of the past and future, full of stories, full of my identity, full of suffering, that I could no longer hear the birds singing around me. So, for adults, life is no longer magical anymore. And the main reason is because, but then they send me away to teach me how to be sensible, logical, responsible, practical. And then they showed me a world where I could be so dependable, clinical, intellectual, cynical. We become conditioned. So we go from the innocence of childhood to being conditioned by our parents, our family, our culture and society, our schools, our religions, etc. And we end up developing an ego. And over time, the ego gets stronger and stronger until one day we completely lose our innocence, our playfulness, and become responsible, practical, dependable adults. And I'm not saying that conditioning is bad per se. I mean, we all need to be conditioned as children to learn the rules of practical reality. I mean, for example, knowing how to safely cross the street, knowing how to interact with our fellow human beings, the teaching of basic right and wrong, like you shouldn't hit other kids who you are playing with in the sandbox, that you should share your toys and stuff like that. Because if you don't teach a child how to act, if you don't condition a child, they won't grow, they won't learn, and they become helpless. So I would argue that we need to go through this process where we become conditioned, where our ego emerges and solidifies, where we become separated from source, where we forget where we came from, where we forget our eternal truth, sort of a paradise lost. It's natural to lose our innocence, sort of a maturation process that we all go through. For example, I remember one day, I don't know, maybe it was in 5th grade or so, and I was playing with toy action figures. And for some reason, it just didn't feel right anymore. It was no longer fun for me playing with toy action figures. And it was strange, almost confusing. And yet, at the same time, it was almost sad because I had previously enjoyed playing with toy action figures. And yet, something shifted in me. And I took the toy action figures back and I put it in a box. And I never played with them again. I was done with that part of my childhood. No one told me, Noah, you can no longer play with those toy action figures because you are growing up. No, it happened naturally, like autumn leaves falling off a tree. We all go from believing in Santa Claus to not believing in Santa Claus. And it's healthy. It's natural. And on a deeper metaphysical level, it seems that we need to develop an adult ego in order to forget our true eternal self. So that as adults, we then can remember our true eternal self. Like the prodigal son story, we need to leave home or to be kicked out of heaven in order to return home, to return back to heaven. We need to go through the separation, and then through suffering, we awaken and are reunited with our true self. The title of the song is called The Logical Song, and logic is of the mind. This is knowledge. And we all need knowledge, and going to school is useful for us in the world of form for practical reality. It's been helpful learning about science, for example. Think of all the wonderful inventions and innovations that have occurred because of science and knowledge. So, the mind is useful on one level. But when the mind is in control, when it's the master, not the servant, that's when things become dicey. And in truth, we can't use the logical mind to awaken. You can't use the mind itself to awaken. Awakening, to use the words of Spock from Star Trek, is illogical. It's not logical. This spirituality is very illogical because it doesn't fit into our practical world. You can use the mind to solve problems, to invent things, but you can't use the mind to solve the riddle of awakening because it's not the mind that awakens. That's why the sages call it no mind. It's silent awareness. It's nothingness. It's emptiness. That's why it's so hard for many to awaken, because they're trying to use the mind to awaken. They're trying to use the intellect to awaken, not the heart, not the no mind. In a sense, awakening, it's an unlearning. It's ironic, and I think that's the right word. It's ironic because we go through a period of learning. Then when it's time for us to awaken, there's an unlearning. And after you awaken, you will still use the mind for practical purposes, to think, to create. Nothing wrong with that. But you're no longer controlled by the mind. The mind is no longer the master, but the servant. One of the lyrics is the word cynical. The ego has a vested interest in preserving itself, so it's naturally distrusting of others. And I would say it doesn't trust the world. The ego also has the need to create enemies, and it needs to be right. That's why people are so judgmental, so distrusting, so cynical. There are times when all the world's asleep. The questions run too deep for such a simple man. Won't you please tell me what we've learned? I know it sounds absurd. Please tell me who I am. All right, there are times when all the world's asleep. Now, for this spiritual interpretation, this is not that people are literally in bed asleep for the night. This is asleep being the normal egoic living, being asleep. The waking dead. If you haven't awakened, you're asleep. You're still lost in the dream. In a way, you're a zombie, lost in the mind, lost in your identity, lost in egoic consciousness. And when you awaken, you can actually see it. You can actually see others around you not present, not here in the now, lost in their mind, asleep. And it's not a judgment, because that's where we all used to be. That's where everyone who ever had an awakening used to be. That's where I used to be. We all we all used to be asleep, lost in our minds. We were all zombies at one time. The questions run too deep. Yet, even if you are asleep, you can still have questions. Even if you are asleep, you can have a stirring inside you where you begin to have questions about your place in the world, where you begin to question the way things are and how everyone is acting. You begin to question egoic reality, egoic consciousness. You may even start to recognize the insanity of egoic consciousness. All this fear and desire, all this suffering, all of your own suffering. And you wonder if there's a way out of all this suffering, all this delusion, all this insanity. And so naturally, you begin to ask questions. So it's a natural part of the spiritual path to have questions. For such a simple man. Here's the deal. To awaken, you have to be simple. Complexity is of the logical, knowledgeable mind, of the clever mind, of the mind that wants to debate things, wants to take sides, wants to be right. This is the mind that keeps you asleep. Like I said earlier, you can't awaken with that mind. You have to become simple. Awareness, the now, is quite simple. It's just here and now. That's it. And that's why people probably miss it, because they expect awakening to be something complex, like some sort of mathematical theorem, or something that has bells and whistles with it. Nothing is further than the truth. It's silence, stillness, nothingness, emptiness. It's all quite simple. Won't you please tell me what we've learned? Well, what we've learned is knowledge and stuff about the practical world. And we've learned how to become egos. And like I said before, it seems to be a natural process that we need to go through to forget so that we can remember. I know it sounds absurd. Please tell me who I am. It's not absurd to ask, please tell me who I am, for those who have awakened. That's why you go to teachers, because they can tell you who you truly are. They can help point you in the right direction. They can show you who you truly are. If you ask an ordinary ego, who am I? They'll just say, well, you're John Doe or Jane Doe, meaning that you are your name, right? Or you're a great actor or athlete or business person or artist or scientist, etc. Meaning that you are your career or what you do. Or they'll say, you are a father or mother or son or daughter, etc. And so on. But these are just roles that we play in this dream. It's not our true selves. It's the ego, our false self. Please tell me who I am. I'll tell you who you are. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. You are a part of Source. You are an eternal being. You are love. But you have forgotten it. You're asleep, and hopefully one day you will awaken from the dream. I said, watch what you say, or they'll be calling you a radical, liberal, oh, fanatical, criminal. Won't you sign up your name? We'd like to feel you're acceptable, respectable, oh, presentable, a vegetable. Oh, take it, yeah. So, after you've awakened, people around you are going to think you're a radical, you're fanatical, right? Because you're no longer playing along with the insanity of the world. You're no longer playing along with egoic consciousness. Jesus was called a radical, a fanatic, and even worse, he was labeled a criminal back then because of what he said. And the authorities needed to get rid of him because he saw through the insanity of egoic consciousness and tried to help people awaken. Now, thankfully, today, you're not going to die for awakening and saying that you're an eternal being having a human experience. Well, in most countries, you're not going to get in trouble. So, the people around you, families, friends, co-workers, they are going to think that you're becoming weird, that you're going crazy. And they are either going to want to change you back to your old self, or they won't want to hang out with you anymore. This is sort of the collateral damage or fallout that happens after you awaken. And it's natural. Think of it. Egos want to hang out with other egos who participate in creating enemies, who constantly complain about others. Egos love drama, love conflict. And as you awaken, you no longer want to play those games anymore. So it's natural that you no longer associate with those people any longer. And he mentions vegetable, and in a way, people who are asleep are sort of vegetables, right? So I thought that was funny. So the song then goes into a saxophone solo, and then it repeats the similar stanza of When All the World's Asleep, which I already went through earlier. Because I was feeling so logical, digital. So the digital line in here I find interesting, and it's quite ominous actually, because this was written in 1979, right when personal computers were still in their infancy. But in the following decades, the personalized computer, has become more and more pervasive. And then you have the internet and smartphones. And now, today everybody is hooked into the digital world. And one way that this world keeps us asleep is by having us all hooked into the internet, into our computers, into social media, the news, video games, entertainment, etc. I mean, try not to look at your cell phone for an hour, right? See how hard that is. And especially for younger generations, just the constant addiction of looking at their smartphones, which is making them spiritually dumb. The smartphone is making them spiritually dumb. Now, I'm not saying that smartphones are bad, that all social media is bad, and that computers are bad. No. I mean, I use a computer, I have a smartphone, obviously, and I'm on YouTube. But you have to ask yourself, are you addicted to it? Are you using it as a distraction to keep you asleep, as a zombie? Do you find yourself constantly looking at it rather than being present with what is? Just something to consider. And to finish the lyrics of the song, it's getting unbelievable. You can interpret this as egoic consciousness is getting unbelievable, which it is, unbelievably insane. But you can also interpret this as when we first awaken, it can feel unbelievable to the point where you think you might be going crazy, right? I mean, others probably think you're going crazy, but you too might think you're going crazy. But then over time, you begin to settle, and sensing eternity, knowing your true self, becomes more, well, you get used to it. Like when you wade into a cold lake. By and by, your feet and legs slowly get used to the temperature. Then your torso and arms, then head. That's what it's like. You just get used to living in eternity. So that's it. Hopefully, this has been helpful, and thanks for watching. Until we meet again next time in the miraculous, beautiful, not logical, eternal now.